Happy Friday, everyone. This is Dr. McClellan. This is your second lecture for Athenaze Chapter 2. This is meant to be a supplement to your reading and some of the work that you're doing on your own to go through the material before we do some of our work on Monday together in class. So Chapter 2 covers a little bit more detail for some of the things that you started to recognize in Chapter 1, where we went through some of the readings and exercises together. So today we're going to be focusing on the very basic building blocks of verbs and nouns in ancient Greek. And within those categories, we're going to talk about a couple specific groups. Under verbs, we're going to deal with the indicative mood, one of a couple moods that we see in Greek. We'll talk about what moods mean. And we'll also learn the imperative, how to give commands in ancient Greek. Under nouns, we're going to talk about all the different cases, something that you guys had some questions about. So far, we've seen the nominative, which is what we use to indicate a subject in a sentence, and the accusative. Well, today we're going to learn all 5 cases that Greek uses and how they are used and how we can typically translate them. And along with that, we'll look at how the definite article, the word for the, it can change depending on what case it goes with, something you've also seen in words like ha dikaiopoulos versus ton dikaiopolin, for example. So let's start with verbs. To review, there are 5 pieces of information I need to know to identify any Greek verb. This is that list that I mentioned last time you should have repeating over and over like a broken record in the back of your head. So for any verb I see in Greek, no matter what the ending, what the form is, if I can break down the person, number, tense, mood, and voice, I can translate it. So, just to recap, person and number are what you see in the chart there in purple and green. Person refers to either first person, I or we, the person speaking typically. Second person, the person I am speaking to, so you guys are second person to me, or I would be the second person to you. Either you or conveniently y'all, since we are in Texas. And third person, either he, she, or it, depending on the gender, and third person singular, or they, if I'm talking about multiple people. Those should be pretty straightforward if you've taken any language before, Spanish, French, otherwise. This is pretty second nature to you by now. That's the same structure we use in ancient Greek. In addition, we talked about tense. When an action occurs is going to be important. Right now, all the ones we're dealing with are in present tense, so we don't really need to worry about tense for now. We'll learn other ones later. Mood is going to be important today, the degree to which an action is real, the difference between I will study for the quiz versus I should study for the quiz, or I might not study for the quiz. And finally, voice, the relationship between the subject and the verb. I mentioned last time, this may throw you off if you've taken Latin before. You know that there's an active and passive voice in that language. Same with English and Spanish and most other Romance languages, which derive from Latin. But Greek has a third voice, the middle voice, which is kind of reflexive. If I hit myself with a ball, that's going to be used in the middle voice. This will be a little clearer when we have some examples. This is looking ahead a little bit. But for now, most of our verbs are going to be active in nature, like I run, I hit, he, she, or it carries, like we saw in the last chapter. But today we should talk about moods, because this is one of those concepts that people struggle with when they first take ancient Greek. And basically, the rules of thumb to remember with moods is they indicate whether or not the action is real or valid according to the speaker. And that last part is really important. So for instance, the indicative mood, the one you're really dealing with right now, is used to indicate a real action that has happened, is currently happening, or will happen in the future, according to the speaker. So, for example, I could say it was hot yesterday, and it absolutely was. I think we topped out at 104 degrees. It was very sweaty, it was miserable and hot for someone like me from Boston, and we would all agree, probably, that it was hot yesterday. It's a pretty factual statement. On the other hand, since I am also from Boston, I could say with full confidence that the Celtics will win the NBA championship. Now, you guys, as probably Spurs fans, might scoff at that and say, that's ridiculous, Dr. McClellan. The Celtics didn't even make the finals last year. But because I believe that to be real, and it's completely uncontrovertible, you can't convince me otherwise, in ancient Greek, I would put that sentence, the Celtics will win the NBA championship, in the indicative because I believe it to be real. So it doesn't matter if it's factually accurate, it just matters whether the speaker believes it to be so. So it's just simply saying what I think to be fact. Or even an opinion, Texas barbecue is better than any other barbecue. I can find plenty of people who disagree with me, but because I believe that to be real, I would use the indicative mood to say that. Now, the other mood we're going to look at today is the imperative mood, which is basically used to give a command. Technically speaking, and this gets a little bit into the linguistics, so you don't have to worry about this too much, but technically speaking, the imperative is less real than the indicative. Well, why? The imperative is usually pretty authoritative, right? If someone gives you a command, you typically do it. But just because I give you a command, that doesn't mean you'll actually do what I tell you to do. I could say, don't forget to study your flashcards, but some of you might forget to study your flashcards, even though I told you just now in this lecture that you're listening to, don't forget to study your flashcards. You're going to have a quiz. Remember to do your homework, so on and so forth. So just because a command is given doesn't mean the action is taking place, but it's very likely that it will. So it's pretty real, but not quite as real as the indicative mood in Greek. Don't worry about the subjunctive and optative. I'm just putting them on this slide so that you have for future reference what the other two moods are in Greek. And we're not going to even see the optative until next semester, and I don't know if we're even going to see the subjunctive until near the end of this semester. But just in short summary, the subjunctive and optative cover moods that are even less likely. For conditions, if this happens, then this might happen. I do this so that this might happen, so forth. So a phrase like, you really shouldn't do that, isn't the same as saying, you are not doing this, in fact. I could say the Celtics, they really should win the NBA championship, but I don't know. Maybe they'll be beaten by the Warriors or somebody else. Or if the Celtics beat the Spurs, which may happen, maybe I think it's very likely to happen, but if they beat the Spurs, then Dr. McClellan will gloat about it all week. That's an example of what the Greeks might call the subjunctive, something I believe is probably going to happen, but I'm not 100% sure, so I wouldn't put it in the indicative column. And the optative is just used for things that are not very likely, but perhaps it'll happen. So usually used for wishes and remotely potential things. So if the Spurs somehow, by some stroke of God, beat the Celtics, which I don't think will happen, but let's say hypothetically that happens, then Dr. McClellan will be miserable all week. So that's an example of when the optative might be used. If I say that, well, if the Spurs manage to pull that off, I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. So I'd put that in the optative. So it's all about how much the speaker believes the action is factual, is real, and it's all about their opinion. So that's basically the definition for the moods. But for now, just be aware that for all the factual statements that you get, Dicaeopolis carries a rock, the work is long and difficult, that's what we call the indicative mood. It's indicating what seems to be a fact to the speaker. And imperative is used for commands. If I tell someone to do something, or if Dicaeopolis commands someone to do something in the stories. So, if we're thinking about verbs, where are we going to see these moods pop up? Well, you have to remember how verbs are constructed in Greek. We talked about this last time in the first video, but there's usually two parts to a basic verb and how it's constructed. The stem of the verb, which gives me the basic meaning of what the action is I'm trying to say. So for a verb like lege, the stem is leg, which for ancient Greek means, oh, someone is speaking or saying something, leg. But I don't know who's speaking until I hear the ending. The ending tells me, for example, lege, that means he, she, or it says. So I know someone else is doing, maybe it's Dicaeopolis is saying, or maybe it's his slave Xanthias, who will meet this chapter, is speaking. But I don't know that until I get the ending, a, thrown onto the end of it, the person and number. For the indicative mood, when I want to indicate just a simple fact, a simple statement, I'm going to use these endings. So notice in the third person singular, you've already seen a is the ending that means he, she, or it does something. The rest of the endings here complete the picture. So if I want to say I do something, whether it's speak, say, run, or so forth, in the indicative mood, I'm going to use omega. O means I as a verb ending in Greek in the present tense. Eis, the second person singular, is what I use to say you, and if I were just talking to one of you, is doing something. And then a for third person singular. If I want to say we are doing something, I'll use the ending amen. Amen, first person plural, you can see at the top right, we, amen. Second person plural, ete, y'all. And then finally, third person plural will be ousi. Ousi, remember omicron and upsilon are like soup in English, OU. usi for they. So what does this look like when I put them together? Well, let's take another verb that you're going to see this chapter. One of the most basic verbs that we'll come back to again and again. You'll be sick of it by the time we get to the end of the semester, but it's a great one to remember. Luo. The stem of that verb is lu. If I take the omega away, I know what the stem is. Luo means I loosen, or to loosen, to untie something, for example. So if I just want the stem of that verb, I take away that omega at the top in red, and I'm left with lu. So in the chart below, in the blue, you can see I start my verb with the stem, loosens, lu. But if I want to say who's loosening something, I have to be more specific in Greek. So if I add omega to the end in the top left, I'm going to get in orange, luo, I loosen. Now I know who's doing it. I'm doing it. Luo, I loosen, I untie, I unbind. If I want to change that and say, no, I'm not loosening, you're loosening, you loosen, and I'm talking to one person, I'll change the ending from o to ace, the row below. So you can see there, lu, loosens with ace, you, gives me luace in orange, you loosen, one person. Third person singular, he, she, or it, we saw before, ei. If I put that on the end of lu, gives me lue, he, she, or it loosens in that third orange. On the right side, if I'm just changing them to the plural, all I have to change is the ending. So this is a case in point. Pay attention to the endings of the verbs that you're dealing with. Lu amen means we loosen. Lu amen. Y'all loosen, if I'm talking to all of you right now and I gave you all a bunch of knots to untie, I might right now say, luete, you are all untying, you are all loosening, y'all are loosening. And then finally, if we're talking about somebody else separate from our conversation, I could say, they loosen, luusi, I'd add for an ending, luusi, they loosen, they untie. So, in the present tense, active voice, indicative mood, the present active indicative of luo looks like what you see here. This is this is a typical chart that you're going to see a lot this semester, and this is the type of thing you can expect to see on a quiz. If I say, give me the present tense, active voice, indicative mood of luo, now that you know that this is the form you get, you should be able to fill in the chart. Start with the stem lu, and add all those endings you saw before, the primary endings. Luo, luace, lue, luamen, luete, luusi. I loosen, you loosen, he, she, it loosens, and so on. So I'm going to repeat them again. Luo, I loosen. Luace, you loosen. Lue, he, she, or it loosens. Luamen, we loosen. Luete, y'all loosen. Luusi, they loosen. And there's your present active indicative of luo. Okay? So as long as you remember how to put them together, it's a piece of cake. So let's talk about commands. If I want to tell one of you, hey, so-and-so, untie that person or untie that thing, whatever it happens to be. If I'm talking to one person and I'm giving them a command, I use what's called the second person imperative. It's kind of like if I'm saying, hey, you, hence second person, you go loosen that. The ending I use is epsilon. So you can see second person singular. If I'm telling one of you, loosen, I say lue, loosen, untie right now. The plural is luete, which you may recognize as similar to this one here. Luete can also mean all of you are loosening, in fact, but it can also be a command that means, hey, all of you, untie that person. Luete, I could say, to command. Excuse me. You notice that there's also a third person imperative. I include that in the PowerPoint, but you don't really need to know that for now. But basically the third person imperative is translated as follows. Lueto would mean something like, hey, let him, her, or it loosen. Let that person take care of it. Let them do that instead of you. Lueto, let him loosen, let her loosen. Or luenton, let them loosen. Don't memorize those. Those aren't important for you to know right now, but this is just good to have for reference for later on. A very special verb that you're going to see a lot is the verb to be, which you already saw in the form esti for he, she, or it is. For example, dikaiopolis esti iskouros, dikaiopolis is strong, is the third person singular form of to be in the present tense. The problem with Amy, however, is that it's a very irregular verb. It's actually, of course, one of the oldest ones in ancient Greek, and over a long period of time changed in its form. So the forms that you have here are very irregular. There's not a very obvious pattern to them, so the most useful thing to do with this chart is just memorize it. This is one of those verbs that you want to have a good flashcard for. So there's really nothing to it but to memorize what you see on this chart here. So I'm going to repeat the forms of to be in the present tense, active voice, and indicative mood. So present, active, indicative, you can see that in blue. So eimi means I am. If I want to say I'm strong, I'd say eimi iskouros. Eimi iskouros, I am strong. You are is you are. Esti or estin, he, she, or it is. Esmen, we are. Este, y'all are. And finally, asi or asin, they are. So I'm going to repeat them just in Greek, one after another. Amy, esti, esmen, este, asi. If you can repeat that over and over in your head until you get sick of it, memorize the verb to be. It's very important to have that down early. So this is one I want you to spend some time with over this weekend and into next week in preparation for your next quiz. You might see the verb to be on your next quiz. That's just a little subtle hint from me to you. Now, not all verbs are the same, as it turns out, and one of the things that we're going to see frequently in Greek is that some verbs end their stems in weak vowels that will contract and combine with other vowels to make different sounds. One of the most common forms of this is epsilon contraction. So, in short summary, to give us some background, some Greek verbs have stems that end in what we call the weak vowels that include epsilon, omicron, and alpha, basically the short vowels. So you can see epsilon's the short version of E, eta's its longer cousin, omicron is short O, omega is its longer cousin, and alpha can be long or short depending on the form you get. For now, we're just going to talk about epsilon, and it turns out that epsilon is very weak. It's the weakest of all the Greek vowels. Smooth E doesn't really have a lot of strength to it, and as a result, it's often dominated by stronger vowels like omega and diphthongs like oo, omicron, upsilon. And even when it runs into other weak vowels, they combine to form new sounds that are a little bit stronger that hold up to the endings that get attached to them. So I want you, in addition to following some of the other stuff this chapter, to memorize the following formulas, because this is going to show up again and again with epsilon contraction. So when epsilon runs into another epsilon, they together in a verb can create the ending a. Epsilon and epsilon gives us a, the first one. When epsilon runs into that particular diphthong a, it just forms a longer version of a. That's that circumflex, that long mark over it. That just tells us to stretch it out. So if you think of Fonzie from Happy Days, you'll know the sound of this. A, stretched it out. Epsilon and omicron, very common contraction. That gives us oo, like soup. Which not very intuitive, but epsilon and omicron, that short E and short O, gives us oo when they run into each other. When epsilon runs into oo, it just makes a longer oo, stretched out. That's that circumflex telling you to really stretch it out. Ooh. And then finally, when epsilon runs into omega, omega just beats it up, and you just get a longer O as a result. So what does this mean when we're dealing with verbs? Well, take a verb like phileo, one of the verbs from this chapter. How do I know phileo is going to go through contraction? Well, I know that because at the very top in red, when I take omega, the ending, when you see phileo in the dictionary, take away omega and you're left with the stem phile, to love. Now, if you look at that, it ends the stem with phile, and epsilon is at the end, so I know it's going to go through epsilon contraction rules. So, pay attention to the rules on the left that you can see in black and red as I go through the chart here and show you how the different forms change as I go through. So, first person singular, if I want to say I love, I already start with my stem phile, and I add the ending for I, o, and that just gives me philo, I love, because I have epsilon and omega giving me a long omega. Philo, I love. Philo, I don't say phileo, I say philo, they combine. When phile runs into ace, that's the second rule down on the left. Epsilon plus a gives me a longer philes. Philes, you love. Third person singular, when phile runs into a, same rule applies, right? Because epsilon runs into that diphthong a, so I get philae. Philae, it has that long circumflex over it. He, she, or it loves. Philae with that circumflex. Now, plurals. I mentioned before that when epsilon runs into omicron, you're going to get that combination. So first person plural, if I want to say we love, start with phile, add omen, and that gives me philumen. Philumen, because epsilon and omicron give me oo, so philumen, we love. Second person plural, phile runs into eta, that gives me epsilon plus epsilon, because this is the epsilon at the beginning of eta, the epsilon at the end of phile, so I end up with philate. Philate, y'all love. And then finally, phile with usi just gives me a longer form of philusi, because epsilon runs into oo, that diphthong, and just lengthens it. Philusi. That's how epsilon contraction works, and there are going to be several verbs that do this in Greek that are all going to follow this pattern. So, if I were to give you, for example, a quiz that says, give me the present tense, active voice, indicative mood of phileo with the stem phile, to love, you should be able to piece together what to do with this contraction and tell me first person singular, I love, is philo, long omega. Second person singular, philes, long a. Remember, there's contraction happening here. Third person singular, philae, he, she, or it loves. Remember the plural, phile plus omen gives me philumen, we love. Philate, y'all love, not philaete, but philate, y'all love, and then philusi, they love. So anytime you have an epsilon contraction verb, we want to make sure to remember this pattern, which we will practice with on Monday. When this goes to the imperative, just pay attention to the second person forms right now. Again, I put the third person forms here for your own reference, but we're not going to really see them until next semester, so don't worry about them. But if I want to tell one of you, hey, so-and-so, love somebody, be in love, I'm going to also have epsilon contraction here as well, because when I take the stem phile and add my command ending that gives me phile, love, because I have epsilon plus epsilon. I have a contraction. Now, this is where some of the accents can be important. I've mentioned we're not going to worry about them too much this semester, but this is one place where we do need to pay attention, because there's a slight difference between phile, with that strong accent aigu, the rising accent, or sharp accent, versus philae, that circumflex below, which is what I get when I combine epsilon with diphthong a. So, if I have phile, if an ancient Greek heard me pronounce it short like that, they'd know that was a command. Hey, so-and-so, love, phile. But if they heard me say philae and stretch it out, they would know I was talking about somebody else who is loving. He, she, or it loves, because I've combined phile with a. So there's a slight difference in spelling there, which you'll need to remember when you come across those forms in a sentence. Now, the good news is, most of the time, the rest of the sentence, the context of the story, is going to tell you when so-and-so is loving versus when somebody's saying, hey, you love, phile. But that's also an important thing to remember, that the accents can change. The plural form of the imperative is pretty simple. It's phile with ete, so I still get philete. Hey, all of you love, philete. And that should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so that gets us to the second part of this chapter, which is going to focus on the Greek nouns. So far, we've learned that there are three things that we need to know to identify and translate any Greek noun that's in front of us. Any Greek noun I see is going to have a case, a number, is it singular or plural, and a gender. All nouns have a gender. It's either masculine, feminine, or neuter, which I just have to know by memorizing that as part of the vocabulary. Number, pretty easy to tell singular or plural, But the case is very important because that's telling me how it works in the sentence. We saw this, for example, with ha dikaiopolis versus ton dikaiopolin, how that works in the sentence. So Greek has 5 cases. The nominative, which we saw with a word like ha dikaiopoulos, indicates that that word is the subject of the sentence. It's performing the action of the verb. The genitive, which we haven't seen yet, indicates origin or possession. It's usually translated with the phrase of in English, of that person, of that place. Dative is a case used to indicate the indirect object. So unlike the direct object, which receives the action of the verb, like I hit the ball is a direct object, if I hit the ball to someone, that someone is the indirect object. I didn't hit them, but something's happening to them because I hit the ball towards them, so they're still part of the sentence. The accusative we saw with a word like ton dikaiopolin is the direct object that's receiving the action of the verb. The 5th Greek case is the vocative. That's what I use to directly address someone. So if I say, hey, Conrad, or hey, Johnny, or hey, Mary, I would put their names in the vocative because I'm talking to them directly. So if I named any of you in that phrase, then you know I just addressed you in the vocative in ancient Greek. Let me give you a better example of this with an English sentence. So if I took a sentence that's very silly, like, I gave the cat's toy to the dog, Mom, the way I'd form that in ancient Greek is I'd have to put each of those nouns, I, the cat, toy, the dog, mom, into the different cases to show how they're working in the sentence. Remember, Greek doesn't really depend that much on word order, so I can move things around wherever I need to based on what case I put them in. So take a look at that sentence. Who's the subject? Who's performing the action? Well, I am. I'm the one who gave the cat's toy to the dog, so I'm performing the action, so the word I needs to be nominative. So we'll put it in red here. We'll say that's the case. That tells me it's nominative, and it's the subject. So now that it's nominative, I know I am the subject. Gave is my verb. It's not going to go in a case. We'll move on to the next one. The cat. How's the cat working in this sentence? Well, the cat is the possessor of the toy. The cat owns the toy. So I'm going to put the cat in the genitive case because it's the cat's toy. It's not the dog's toy. The dog doesn't own the toy. The cat does. So he's going to be in the genitive. Like I said before, anytime you see something in the genitive case in Greek, by and large you can get away with translating it with the word of. I gave the toy of the cat, or I gave the cat's toy. So let's put him in green to make him genitive since they both have G at the start. The dog. How's the dog working in the sentence? Actually, before I do that, what about toy? Well, the toy is my direct object, right? That's the thing being given. I didn't give the cat away. I didn't give the dog away. I gave the toy to the dog. The toy is being given. It's the direct object. So I'm going to put that in the accusative case. It's the direct object. The dog is not the direct object. I didn't give the dog. I didn't hit the dog. I didn't pet the dog. I gave a toy to the dog. So the dog is the indirect object. It's kind of receiving a byproduct of the action. So typically with the dative case, you want to start with the phrases to or for and kind of roll between those to see which one makes more sense. Here, to makes sense. I gave the cat's toy to the dog. So because I know he's the indirect object, I'm going to put him in the dative case. We'll make him orange here. And then finally, if I'm telling my mom this and said, hey mom, I gave the cat's toy to the dog, because I'm talking directly to her in Greek, I'm going to put her in the vocative case. I'm calling out to her directly. And once I do that, once I give each of them a color, a case, it doesn't matter in ancient Greek where I put them in the sentence because the cases always tell me how they're working in the sentence. So if in ancient Greek I reordered the words to say, Mom, the cat's toy I gave to the dog, I might sound like Yoda, but because I know what the cases are for each of those words, I know that I am the subject, which means I'm the one giving. I know the cat is genitive, so the cat's toy works that way. The toy is the direct object. It's being given because it's accusative. I know I gave it to the dog because he's in the dative, he's orange, and I'm talking to my mom because she's in the vocative case. So I can still piece the sentence together in ancient Greek by knowing what cases the words are in. Which is why, like last time when we looked at the sentence, Dicaiopoulos carries the food, it doesn't really matter what order I put those words in. As long as they stay in the right case, I can still read the sentence and translate it the same way. So, where this gets really important to pay close attention to endings is when we match adjectives to nouns. This is something we saw in chapter 1 as well. When I've had a word like iskouros, strong, and I wanted to talk about somebody and match it to somebody, it had to have the same ending. Ha Dicaiopoulos esti iskouros. Dicaiopoulos is strong. I know they're talking about each other because they have the same ending. The same thing is going to happen in all the other cases. So here's a very important rule I want you to remember. Don't tattoo it on yourself, don't do anything too extreme, but write it down over and over and over again. Greek adjectives modify nouns by matching them in case, number, and gender. Remember that list. Case, number, and gender. That's how Greek nouns and adjectives match each other. Case, number, gender. Case, number, gender. Over and over and over again. Now, we'll get to this in a bit later. We'll match some nouns and adjectives later in this lecture. But I also want to talk about declensions. Declensions are basically patterns of endings that different Greek nouns fall under. They're not the same as gender. This is just what happens with different nouns in ancient Greek as a result of how they historically developed. And fortunately for us, we don't really have to worry about too many of these. For those of you who took Latin and had, I think, somewhere around 5 declensions, if I remember right, this is going to be a sigh of relief that you have. Greek only has 3 declensions, 3 patterns of endings that all nouns fall under. We'll eventually learn the first declension in a couple chapters, which has stems that usually end in alpha and eta, an ah or a sound. And most nouns in the first declension happen to be feminine. Not all of them, and this is key. Declensions aren't the same as gender, but they often correspond to that. Today we're going to talk about the second declension, which covers nouns whose stems end in an o sound, an aw sound. And it just so happens that most nouns in the second declension are masculine or neuter. That's not always going to be the case. We will find some feminine nouns in the second declension, but as a general rule of thumb, most things in the second declension are going to be masculine or neuter. So, to understand how a declension works, we have to look at the system of endings. And this chart is another one that you will need to memorize from this chapter. These are the endings for masculine nouns in the second declension. So, going through this chart, you can see there's singular endings, if I'm talking about one person, place, or thing, and plural endings, if I want to change that to multiple things. And I have 5 cases. If I want one thing that's a nominative, I'm going to add the ending os to it. But if I want to say something belongs to that thing, I'm going to change the ending of that noun to oo, genitive singular. The dative singular, if I say to or for that thing, O, and notice that has a little iota subscript underneath the omega. So it's not just omega, but it's omega with a little squiggly mark underneath. That's that iota subscript we talked about when we went over the alphabet. The accusative ending for singular in the second declension is on, and the vocative is if I talk to somebody directly. That's how I'll mark if I'm talking to someone in Greek. The plural endings, nominative plural, oi, genitive plural, on, dative plural, ois. You've seen some of these before. Some of you asked me about these from the readings. Accusative plural, ous. Remember, omicron and upsilon like soup, ous. And vocative, oi. So, we'll see some examples of nouns that go through this, but again, I want to remind you that there's a very important rule to remember here, that nouns and adjectives have to agree with each other for a Greek sentence to make sense, right? I could have a phrase like ha Dicaiopoulos sophos, one of the adjectives you get in this chapter, wise Dicaiopoulos, or ho kalos anthropos, these are the examples in blue, the beautiful man. All adjectives have to match nouns in case, number, and genitive. So taking those 2 examples, ha Dicaiopoulos sophos and ha kalos anthropos, both of those examples have a noun and adjective that match because they're all masculine, they're all nominative, and they're all singular. They're talking about one person and they're the subject. However, If I want to take those nouns and adjectives and say they're not the subject in my sentence, they're the object. Maybe I hit wise Dicaiopoulos, or I hit the beautiful man for whatever reason. I don't know why I would do that, but let's say I will. I would put them in the accusative, so I have to change both of them. So then I'd say ton Dicaiopolin sophon or ton kalon anthropon. They're now masculine accusative singular. Remember, that's that on ending from the accusative singular towards the bottom on the left, used for both. So, let me give you an example here of matching an adjective to a noun following this system that you saw for masculine nouns. Let's match one random noun, chronos, chronou, ha, which is time, with the adjective kalos, kale, kalon, beautiful. Adjectives usually have multiple endings to them in your dictionary because they can go between different genders. We don't really need to worry about this too much today. We'll see a couple examples where they change, but here, kalos, kale, kalon orders the endings from masculine, feminine, and neuter in that order. So we're going to start with kalos, because that's going to match chronos, which is a masculine noun for time. If I want to say the beautiful time, I'm going to start in the nominative by giving them the same ending, chronos, kalos, beautiful time. Maybe it's doing something. But if I want to make them genitive and say of the beautiful time, I'll change the ending to chronou, kalu. And remember, they have to match, gender, number, and case. Dative, chrono, kalo, to or for the beautiful time. If I hit the beautiful time, I don't know how I'd do that, I'd make them accusative, chronon, kalon. If I want to talk to the beautiful time, if I go really crazy in this class, I might say, oh, chrone kale, oh, beautiful time, and I'll use the vocative endings at the bottom. If there's more than one beautiful time, and they're the subject of my sentence, I'll say chronoi kaloi, beautiful times, the beautiful times do something. Or if they make them genitive, of the beautiful times, chronon kalon, genitive plural. Dative plural, to or for the beautiful times, will be chronois kalois. Accusative plural, chronus kalus. And vocative, if I'm talking to beautiful times, chronoi kaloi. Okay, the next thing we need to cover are the neuter endings. I mentioned that the second declension is all about endings that end with O for the most part, an O sound. The neuter endings are very similar to the masculine endings except in the areas that you see highlighted in red. Those are the only ones that are different. So they're pretty similar, they come from the same system, the same family, but neuter nouns are going to look different because they use a different set of endings. Now, here's a special rule to remember. Neuter nouns in Greek always have the same ending for the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative. So if you know one of those forms, you actually know three, because all you need to do, as you can see here, is copy the nominative endings and use them for the accusative and the vocative. We'll eventually see that this makes it tricky to translate neuter nouns in a sentence. You have to pay very careful attention to how they're being used. But for the purposes of filling a chart like this out, it's great news for you guys because there's not much to remember. You know that the nominative and the accusative are always the same. So here are the endings. If a neuter noun is my subject in the nominative case, it's going to have the ending on. Genitive is the same as the masculine. It's oo, of that thing. To or for in the dative, o, same as the masculine. But remember, in the accusative, if it's a neuter noun, it's the same as the nominative, so I'm going to use on. And the same in the vocative. If I talk to a thing, then I'll use on again. Simple, right? Just remember that the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative are the same, and all the rest of the endings are the same as the masculine, so there's not a whole lot new here for you to memorize. The plural is a little different. If I'm talking about multiple things, and they're my subject in the sentence, they're going to have the ending alpha, a. So a is going to be used if they're the subject. But remember, it's neuter, so the nominative will be the same in the accusative and the vocative, so the endings down there are also a. And the good news is that the genitive and the dative are also going to be own and ois, just like the masculine. So let's take a different noun and use it with the same adjective beautiful. It turns out that trees are things in Greek, so we'll use dendron. as our example here. Dendron, or root for dendrochronology. Dendron is a neuter noun, and I know that by looking at it because the first two forms you get, dendron, dendru, with ta, tell me it's neuter, on, and that ta, we'll learn, is also neuter. So, if I want to say beautiful tree in all the different cases, remember, match gender, number, and case to those endings. They happen to match here. If I look at an adjective like kalos, kale, kalon, the neuter is the third column, kalon. So here, it's pretty straightforward. I have them match. A dendron kalon with that ending could be my subject. The beautiful tree does something. But if something belongs to the beautiful tree or is of the beautiful tree, I'll change the ending to dendru kalu, of the beautiful tree. If I give something to the beautiful tree, I'll make it dative and say dendro kalo, to the beautiful tree, for the beautiful tree. If I hit the beautiful tree for some mean reason, I'll put it back into on. Remember, this is a special thing with the neuter. It's the same in the nominative, accusative, and vocative. So dendron kalon could also be accusative. Or if I'm talking to a beautiful tree and I go really crazy, I'll say, oh, dendron kalon, oh, beautiful tree. I don't know why I would do that, but if I did, that's the form I would put it in. If there's more than one tree and they're my subject, I'll say dendra kala, the beautiful trees do something. If something belongs to them, if something's of the beautiful tree, my endings are on, dendron kalon. To or for the beautiful trees, dendrois kalois. And accusative, copy the nominative, dendra kala. Or if I'm talking to beautiful trees, I'll call them dendra kala as well. So those are the neuter endings. Those are also going to be important for you to start memorizing this weekend. And fortunately, you have an extra day with Labor Day to start working on these. Now, a couple more things that we need to cover. You also noticed with nouns in the first chapter that they often come with what we call the definite article, the word that means the, going with it. Well, it turns out that the definite article also changes with cases and numbers. And they're also going to match their nouns in gender, number, and case. They work a lot like adjectives in that way. And the good news is that the chart you see here is all you need to know. They're used for all declensions. It doesn't matter if the noun is first declension, second declension, third declension, all the other ones we're going to know. This is the chart you need to know. This is it, the definite articles. So this is also one you need to start memorizing and matching to the different nouns that you see. So let me go through the ones in the masculine and the neuter because those are the only ones you need to know for now, because all of our second declension nouns for the most part are going to be masculine or neuter. We'll learn the feminine ones later. So if I want to say the in Greek and it's a masculine noun, nominative is ha, far left, genitive is tu, dative is to. Notice these are sounding a lot like those endings. Accusative, ton, vocative, o. Turns out when I say something in the vocative, I'm always going to use o if I say, almost like saying o, oh in English. Plurals in the masculine, hoi, ton, tois, and tous. They sound like the other endings, so they're easy to remember. As long as you remember to give that rough breathing for ha and hoi and add a tau before the others, it's the same system. Now, let's go through the neuters. Ta is the nominative singular definite article for the with a neuter noun, ta. Genitive is the same, tu. Dative's the same, to. But remember, with neuters, the nominative and the accusative are the same, so I'm just going to copy and repeat ta. It's pretty simple, right? When it goes to the plural, we saw alpha used as the ending before. It's the same thing with the definite articles. If I want to say the beautiful trees, I'm going to say ta dendrocala, ta, ton, tois, and ta in that order. The easiest way to memorize definite articles is to copy this chart over and over. Draw it out, erase the forms, and repeat them out loud. Ha, tu, to, ton, hoi, ton, tois, tous. Ta, tu, to, ta, ta, ton, tois, ta. The more you do this, the more time you put into it, the better you'll do with it. So let's put all of this together with some of the examples we saw before. If I want to go back to beautiful time and I want to make sure I have the with it, I just have to use the definite article. Ha kalos chronos is my nominative form for the beautiful time. Tu kalu chronou, of the beautiful time. To kalo chrono, to or for the beautiful time. ton kalon chronon if it's accusative, and if I'm talking to it, I'll say o kale chrone, o kale chrone. Notice all of those forms match in gender, they're all masculine, case, so nominative, genitive, and so forth, and time, they're all singular. I change all the forms together and keep them matching, gender, number, case. Plural forms, hoi kaloi chronoi, the beautiful times, ton kalon chronon, of the beautiful times, tois kalois chronois, to or for the beautiful times, tous kalous chronos, if they're the direct object, and o kaloi chronoi, if I'm talking to beautiful times. So go back over this chart. You can repeat this part of the lecture if you need to. You also have the PDF of this for reference, but practice matching nouns and adjectives to the definite article. They all have to agree in gender, number, and case. Hence, if I change it to the beautiful tree, I'm going to change to my neuter endings, and they all have to match with the different cases. So if I have the beautiful tree as my subject, I will say ta, kalon, dendron, nominative, singular, neuter, all three. Genitive, tu kaludendru, of the beautiful tree, to kalodendro, to or for the beautiful tree. Remember, this is neuter this time, so if I want to say the beautiful tree, I'm hitting it, and I want to make it the direct object, it looks the same as the nominative. Just copy and paste. Ta kalon dendron. If I'm talking to a beautiful tree, I'll say o kalon dendron. Again, I'm not sure why I'd do that, but that's how I would say it. Plurals. Ta kala dendra. The beautiful trees are a certain way, do something. Ton kalon dendron, of the beautiful trees. Tois kalois dendrois, to or for the beautiful trees. And again, accusative is the same as the nominative. So ta kala dendra, I'll reuse that down at the bottom. Or o kala dendra if I'm talking to them. Straightforward. As long as you memorize the endings, you can do this for any noun, any adjective, and match them to the definite articles, as long as you remember the rule. Gender, number, and case have to match. Okay, we'll practice with this on Monday. So your homework for Monday, which I will go through in class in a little bit when I see you guys, I want you to prepare reading 2 Alpha, where we'll meet Xanthias, the clever slave of Dicaeopolis on his farm, one of my favorite characters in the story. I want you to prepare that. Remember, you can write the translation out, but I want you to get used to reading from the Greek. So don't rely on looking down at your English. I want you to practice working on the Greek. So make sure you prepare. What that means is that you should have a translation ready or a question based on something you're stuck on. Don't just come in and say, I didn't do it. That's going to hurt your participation grade. Prepare reading 2 Alpha. And do exercises 2 Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. That's going to give you some practice translating English and Greek sentences back and forth. And just as a note, since we have Labor Day on Monday and we have a bit of a shorter week, we're going to be moving our normal quiz to next Monday, since that'll give you a little bit of extra time to work on it. So there will be no quiz next Friday, but you will have one the following Monday. So enjoy your Labor Day weekend. I hope you guys have a great restful weekend, that you're enjoying the start of this class, that you're enjoying your exposure to Greek. Rewatch this video from time to time if you need to. Use the PowerPoint PDF to go over things, and let me know what's helping you. And I look forward to hearing from you guys soon. So I should actually go back to the homework and say this is not for Monday, but rather for Wednesday, basically the first day we come back from school. So a little bit of a correction there, but I will see you guys when we come back from our much-needed Labor Day weekend. See you guys later. Bye.